This teenage boy was brutally dismembered and tortured, and this is a massive trigger warning. This case takes place in Ireland on January 12th, 2020. Drogheda is a port town in Ireland, and Kean Woods was born there on February 2nd, 2003. Growing up, his favorite thing to do was drive his dirt bike around, but in his early teenage years, he started involving himself in petty crimes. And in 2018, he turned to organized crime when he was just 15, and got the reputation as a very violent individual. January 12th, 2020 started out as a normal day for the Woods family, but by the time the afternoon came around, everything had changed. Kean was missing and nobody could get a hold of him. The following day, his sister posted on Facebook asking if anyone knew where her brother was. The last time Kean was seen was on Sunday afternoon near his home. That day, Kean called his mother for some money so he can get a taxi home. And since then, his family and friends couldn't get a hold of him. His family then reported him missing to the police. When the police took a deeper look at Kean's history, they realized his family had a good reason to worry. Just days before Kean disappeared, a video was posted online by a local criminal, and in this video, the man made numerous threats to kill 17-year-old Kean. The threats were graphic and involved words like abduction, murder, and dismemberment. At the time, Drogheda was in the midst of a gang feud, and by the time Kean reached his teenage years, it escalated to full war, and Kean was a part of the gangs. He became involved in one of the dealing gangs, right after the same time when the rivalry with a competing gang started to heat up. Kean's group carried weapons, and they weren't afraid to use them. They also enjoyed making bombs, which they used to attack their opponents' hideouts. And Kean did a bunch of awful things. This one time, he threw a petrol bomb inside the home of a boy who owed the gang money, and Kean told them he would burn them alive in their beds and claimed he didn't do it right the first time. Not long after this, he was arrested and charged with the possession of illegal substances. There's also reports that Kean tortured and killed a woman's cat, since the woman owed him money and she couldn't pay it back on time. These are the things that gave him the reputation of being a dangerous, violent young man. On the Monday, just a couple hours after Kean's sister posted asking for help to find him, a man walking down the street in East Dublin came across a bulky bag. And when he opened the bag, he was met with a horrifying sight. Inside were multiple dismembered human limbs and flip-flops. The following morning at 1:30 a.m., officers responded to reports of a burning vehicle. And when they put out the fire, they found a human head and 2 hands entangled in the burnt wreck. DNA tests then proved that the heads, hands, and limbs all belonged to Kean. The flip-flops did not belong to him, but in the wake of his murder, they were interpreted as a threat to the gang he used to run with. It turns out, weeks before Kean's murder, a 35-year-old man from the opposing gang was attacked on the street and was wearing a pair of flip-flops that were stolen during the attack. Someone from Kean's gang then posed for a photo with the flip-flops and posted the photo online with a caption mocking the guy they belonged to. The man who owned these flip-flops was Robbie Law. Now, the murder and dismemberment of a teenager might seem dramatic for the loss of just some flip-flops, but for those who knew Robbie Law's reputation, it was exactly his style. Robbie was a hitman and was a member of the gang known as the Anti-Maguire faction. He became the prime suspect in the murder of Kean. He was also the prime suspect in a number of other killings. But despite his violent record, he was released from prison just 1 month before Kean's murder. Robbie was then tied to Kean's death when one of his associates pointed authorities in the direction of the house where the teenager had been murdered. Gerald McKenna was the owner of the home, and he told the police Robbie threatened to kill him and his children and turn them into minced meat if he didn't clean up the crime scene inside his home. But when he arrived home after the killing of Kean, there was so much blood that he couldn't clean up all the evidence. Kean's family was devastated by his death and the way his body had been so gruesomely dismembered and spread out. All they had was his head, hands, and limbs. There was hopes the rest of him would be found so they can lay him to rest intact, and 3 months later in April 2020, the final pieces of Kean's body was found in his hometown. And in the months it was out there, it had been eaten quite a bit by animals. Kean was suspected of playing both sides of the gangs, and this is why he was targeted for murder. News then came out on how Kean died when 2 men were arrested. Rival gang members Paul Crosby, aged 27, and Gerald Cruz, aged 49. It turned out the day Kean had gone missing, Paul Crosby had met with him. Kean trusted Paul due to him playing both sides of the gangs. They met outside a shop in town, and Kean got into the car with him and Gerald, before being driven to the house where he would be murdered. Kean was tortured with power tools by the killer and stabbed multiple times in the torso. It's believed the gruesome murder and torture was filmed intended to be used as an intimidation to the rival gang. And it's believed the footage is out there somewhere, but I couldn't find it and it hasn't been confirmed by the police. Kean's body was then dismembered with the power tools. There was no evidence that Paul Crosby and Gerald Cruz were present at the time of the murder, but they were the ones who lured him to his death. Robbie Law was never arrested or charged. The opportunity for justice was missed when Robbie was killed in a gang shooting not long after Kean's torso was discovered. Paul Crosby and Gerald Cruz were charged in relation to the murder of Kean. Paul was sentenced to 10 years and Gerald was sentenced to 7 years. Also, Gerald McKenna, the man who owned the house Kean was killed in, received 4 years since he attempted to get rid of evidence.